Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'll be taking a look at the 2024 slate of Republican presidential candidates and rating them based on whether or not, as of today, I believe they would be favored to defeat Joe Biden in the 2024 presidential election. Now, this should go without saying, we are still well over a year away from the November 2024 general election. We're also still a good couple months away from the February 2024 Iowa caucuses. So things can change. At this point in 2015, which was the last time we had a truly competitive Republican primary, Donald Trump was only starting to surge. In fact, if you go back and look at the betting odds back then, he was barely, I don't even think he was the favorite, and if he was, it was very slim. Jeb Bush was still competitive, Scott Walker was still in it, and so there were a lot of different things that would not have obviously maintained, and things occurred later on in that primary that really shook up the state of politics in America, and the same could happen in this primary. But that being said, we haven't done this exercise yet, and I want to do it at least once this summer before we really get into the heat of election season. And so starting now, I'll be looking at all 8 of these candidates on your screen, plus obviously Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is the front runner, even though he did not attend the debate. And we will be taking a look at their prospects of beating Joe Biden. So we're going to start off with our lowest polling person who qualified for my list, which is Asa Hutchinson. And Asa Hutchinson is the former governor of Arkansas. As you can see, I put this together in like 5 minutes, so it's, don't expect anything amazing, but I'm trying to provide some visuals here. He is the former governor of Arkansas, and again, you can see that on your screen. And Asa Hutchinson is more of a moderate Republican. He was one of 2, the other being Christie, on the debate stage, who said they would not support Donald Trump if he was put in jail. So he's definitely one of the more moderate that's running, but he doesn't have the best moderate record, and I really think he's going to struggle to find a message. I don't think he's that charismatic. I don't think that he's very exciting, and so he's not offensive. I don't think he'd be a disaster, but I think we're going to give him the no because, again, he doesn't have a great record to campaign on as governor of Arkansas. And again, I'm not saying he was a bad governor or a good governor. All I'm saying is that governors who do well in presidential elections are generally able to captivate an audience with a message about what they can do, right? So Asa Hutchinson might be moderate himself, but he doesn't have a record in Arkansas where he worked across party lines. In fact, he governed pretty conservatively with a supermajority in the legislature. So I don't really think he has a coherent message for 2024. He's not a disaster, but he isn't inspiring, and I don't think he would get the turnout necessary to win. I don't think he'd win over independents the way some people would hope for him to. So we're going to go to another governor. Doug Burgum's still in office, so he still has time to work on his resume, but he is the current governor of North Dakota, has been since 2017, and I think he is a bit better than Hutchinson. And I say that for a few reasons. First of all, I think he's a bit more charismatic. He kind of got unlucky before the debate. He, I believe, suffered an Achilles tear while playing basketball. And as someone who does play basketball, that's not a fun injury. But what I will say is that I think he did all right in the debate. I don't think he really did as well as he could have, but he did fine. I think he was more charismatic than someone like Hutchinson. I think he has a better record as governor. I think in general, North Dakota is a more prosperous state than Arkansas, and obviously Arkansas being one of the less prosperous states in the country. I'm not tying that to Hutchinson. Obviously, one governor can't control that. But I think Burgum has a better record, and that kind of ties into my initial point, which is you have to have a coherent message, which Burgum does. I think he's going to say, I'm the competent conservative. I'm not anti-Trump, but I'm also not pro-Trump on my own person. And I think for that reason, not likely to get the nomination, but if he did, I'm going to give him the check. I think that he'd probably be favored to beat Joe Biden. It would be narrow, but I think as someone who has a coherent message that can appeal to both conservatives and win over some independents who don't like Biden, he could probably beat the president. Now, a Burgum versus Biden matchup I don't think has ever been pulled because Burgum's not really, doesn't really have a realistic chance of winning the GOP nomination. But I think if he did make it that far, he would do well. So he gets the check. So far, we have 1 no, 1 yes. We're now going to move on to a senator. This is Tim Scott. He is currently a senator from South Carolina. He won re-election last year by a pretty good margin, although he is in a red state. Tim Scott is kind of in the middle of this primary. I would not call him, ultra conservative or far right, but he is definitely not moderate. He said he would support Trump. He really went all in on the culture war towards the end of that debate. In his closing statement, he made a remark about transgender athletes and I believe maybe bathrooms somewhere in that debate. So he's definitely trying to tune into more conservative side of his I guess, credentials, and I think that could help him. But right now, he needs to focus more on the nomination, so I think that is the good move. Now, here's what I'll say. Tim Scott has a very impressive electoral history. He's done very well in all of his runs. He's actually outperformed the top of the ticket, I believe, every time he's run for Senate. And so he's definitely a good candidate based on that. I will also say that he doesn't really have the baggage that Trump or DeSantis will have. And we'll talk with them later down the line, believe me. But he does not have the scandals. He doesn't really have a super out-of-line voting record. He hasn't really made any statements that I think are easy for Democrats to attack. And so I think for that reason, he'd be in a pretty good spot to beat Joe Biden. He, like I said, decent speaker. I said this in my debate video, but he's a decent speaker. He delivered the GOP response to the State of the Union speech, I believe, in 2021. And, I don't think he had the greatest debate. I talked about that too. But he really has potential to make a good contrast between himself and Joe Biden. I think for that reason, he gets the check too. So we're going to go back to former governors. Chris Christie, governor of New Jersey from 2010 to 2018. And look, Chris Christie, I think, is a really interesting candidate because I don't know what his goal is. I don't think he thinks he can win. I don't know why I can't talk today, but I don't know why he thinks he can win because he's running as an anti-Trump Republican in a very pro-Trump electorate. His favorables with the GOP, the worst of anyone on stage. And he's polling well in New Hampshire. If you look at the polls, he surged to second place ahead of DeSantis, ahead of Ramaswami. And he's doing town hall after town hall. He's really trying to make this about him, have a good ground game. And I think he's putting the most work into it. And obviously you have to respect that. But I don't know if he'd win. I'm going to give him the X for now because I think he's just not, he really doesn't have that big of a base. He will do well with conservatives who don't like Trump, maybe even some moderates. And he's been Trump's harshest critic in the GOP primary by far. That'll get him a good amount of votes, won't get him close to winning, especially when you look at his favorable. I just talked about this. His favorables with the Republicans are terrible. He is in the negatives among his own party. With Democrats, it's even worse. He was not popular as governor of New Jersey. For that reason, I don't think he would really do well against Joe Biden. I think he's a good speaker. He's a good debater. He's talented in that regard, but I think his record is bad. And I think Republicans are just not going to turn out enough for him to get him close to victory. So he would probably lose as well. Now, Nikki Haley, she had a good debate. I think she was the winner of the debate last week. And obviously, one debate doesn't change the course of the primary, but the initial debate, it kind of does show us who can handle the pressure, who the lights are too bright for. And Haley certainly did well in that environment. I think that she's a good speaker. She went toe-to-toe with Ramaswamy in a really good exchange for her that clearly benefited her polling. And she is a relatively well-known politician. She has served as former governor of South Carolina, and she was also the United States ambassador to the UN under Donald Trump. So she has ties to both the GOP establishment and Donald Trump. Obviously, Donald Trump would not be happy if she beat him for the 2024 nomination, but she knows how to work with all sides of the party. She also knows how to win over Democrats. Now, her 2010 and 2014 bids for the governorship, I'm not going to lie, they were not very impressive. I think that she underperformed the top of the ticket both times, but she did run against a good Democratic opponent, so that's worth some consideration. But she has historically done very well in the suburbs. She's historically always appealed to moderate, educated voters, which is a demographic Republicans have been struggling with. And I think she gave the best electability answer on abortion. Abortion's been an issue that's really been costing Republicans. It cost them in the midterms. I don't really think that they're addressing that to the extent they should be. Haley gave the best answer on that by far. And I think that, she's demonstrated an ability to understand that the Republican, the platform the Republicans have on some issues is just out of touch with the American electorate. I think if she can use that to her advantage, she knows what to be conservative on. She knows where, she knows what hills to die on. I think that's going to help her. I think she knows how to pick her battles as well. And I think she'll be a good campaigner against Joe Biden. I think she'd probably beat him, although, again, it's only August, so grain of salt. But right now, she gets the check. So Mike Pence, former vice president, former governor of Indiana. We've got a lot of former governors. I'm realizing this, and we have one more to go. So this is a GOP primary that is filled with former executive officials and also a former president, which we'll talk about at the end of the video. But to get back to Mike Pence, I think was the hardest to rate on this list. And I went back and forth. I could make arguments for both sides, but here's what I'll say. The pros and cons are as follows. The pros for Mike Pence are that he is, he's a more toned down type of DeSantis, and he's very conservative. You listen to him talk, he's very conservative. He's very, pro-life. He is very much in favor of, A lot of the culture war stuff, Republicans, especially DeSantis, have made it's a centerpiece of their campaigns. And so for that reason, I think that he would have some, again, positives and negatives. I think he'd get attacked for a lot of his policy positions, again, opposing gay marriage, opposing abortion, even going to the extent that he goes against the trans community. I think that hurts him with the American electorate, but at the same time, it gives him support among Republicans, which he desperately needs. Now, this ties into the cons. He is very, very polarizing, even within the GOP, when he shouldn't be. But if you remember on January 6th, a lot of the Republicans there were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." A lot of Trump supporters have soured on him. Donald Trump himself has soured on Mike Pence. And I think that that's going to hurt him with the electorate. Because, again, if you have even 10% of Trump voters in swing states saying, "I don't like this guy. He wasn't loyal to us back in 2021. I'm not going to vote for him in the presidential election. I'm not going to be loyal to him," he'd lose. If even 10% of Republicans in swing states, or if 10% of Trump supporters in swing states say that. So that hurts him. I also think that he is not a good speaker. He had a good debate performance. I think that he is a knowledgeable person when it comes to politics. I think he knows what to say, but he's very boring, if I'm being honest. He was by far the least entertaining person on that stage. Whenever I listen to Mike Pence, I feel like I want to fall asleep. Obviously, no offense if you support Mike Pence. I'm, not trying to inject my personal opinion here, but I think we can admit that Mike Pence leaves much to be desired when he talks. And, I could say that about other candidates too. I think that Tim Scott was also pretty boring on August 23rd, the night of August 23rd. But that kind of ties into how he would energize the Trump base. I don't think he's exciting enough. I don't think that he has it in him. So for that reason, he gets the X. But he's by far the closest on this list. I really had a hard time on making this for the decision for Pence. So if you disagree with that, that's fine. I totally get where you're coming from. Believe me, I thought about it. Now, we're getting into our final three. Vivek Ramaswami, entrepreneur from Ohio. He's the only one here who has not held elected office. And I made a video about this, so I think you guys are going to know what my position is if you watch that video. I do not think Vivek Ramaswamy would beat Joe Biden. Look, for a third of Republican primary voters, I think he did exactly what they wanted in that debate. He was anti-Ukraine. He was very conservative on every issue. He took very, very right-wing stances on almost everything. But for the other two-thirds of the GOP base and most moderates and all Democrats, he was too much to the right. You look at the things he said, right? Like the anti-Ukraine stuff has become very prominent. Those figures have become very prominent in the GOP over the course of the past year and a half. But realistically, not a popular thing nationwide. I would say that his energy is not popular nationwide. I think a lot of the rhetoric he uses is too far for the majority of Americans. He's even more so than Trump, who obviously in 2020 was a little too far for the majority of Americans, ever so slightly. So, look, Ramaswamy has some things he could work. He has some assets, right? He's young. He could be charismatic, and he is new to politics, which are all good things in today's electorate. But he is, I think, policy-wise, too out of step with, the average American. I think his statements, like I said, about Ukraine also, but climate change, which I forgot to mention until now, too out of step. So for that reason, I think he loses probably decisively. So now into our final two. We've got Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida. DeSantis is very well known. I think that he's had a rough campaign season. I think he's fallen off. If you asked me this question a year ago, I would have said absolutely. I think DeSantis could probably beat Biden. I think he probably would beat Biden. But today, we're saying no. And so that's for a couple reasons. First of all, DeSantis is not charismatic. I think he actually had the best debate he could have had because he just didn't, completely collapse. But even then, it wasn't great. And I don't think that, say he did as well as he did on August 23rd against Joe Biden in, October 2024, I don't think he'd really convince anyone. I don't really think he'd exploit Joe Biden's weaknesses the way even someone like Trump would. And I would also say that DeSantis, really when you look at the way he interacts with voters, it's not good. He is, I think he gets kind of feisty, kind of whiny in a bad way. And, look, being feisty isn't a bad thing in politics. To go back to Christie, who is famous for being kind of blunt, feisty, I think it worked well for him when he was governor of New Jersey, worked well for him in some 2016 debates. But DeSantis does it, I think, kind of a whiny way, and that hurts him too. So that's what I'll say about DeSantis' kind of charisma problem. He also does not have a great record as governor of Florida. I think his 6-week abortion ban, while it might have worked great in Florida, or is it 6 weeks? I forgot, but it's very restrictive. It might not be 6 weeks, but it's close. It's definitely up there. And I think that, again, didn't hurt him in Florida electorally, but it will hurt him nationwide. Obviously, any sort of abortion restriction is not, unless it's, very far out, is not very popular with the broader electorate. I can also say that I think he's not really in touch. His policy and his platform has mostly been about culture war stuff, which energizes a third of the GOP base, and he'll get, in most states, he'll get second place. He might, maybe win a state or two. But the problem he has is that he does not really have that appeal to working class voters, to voters of color, and to even voters in the suburbs who don't really care about the culture war. So, look, he has his base, and I think that he definitely, I get why a lot of Republicans like him. I just don't think that he would win nationwide against Joe Biden, especially considering he just is such a, he has a lot to work on with his personality, just from an objective standpoint. So that's what I'll say about DeSantis. Now, next up, and our final one, is Donald Trump. Donald Trump is obviously the most complex person on this list. He could very well be actually in prison by November 2024. He has, I think, 3 trials already scheduled for before Election Day, maybe even 4 with the Georgia one, which I'm not sure when that one's being held. But, he has one before Super Tuesday on March 4th, and then he has one in May as well, and I think that he has another one somewhere, I think maybe later in March. But either way, here's what I'll say about Donald Trump. Donald Trump has his strengths, and he would mobilize the GOP base best out of anyone here by far. He has his support. He has people who love him. He has a pretty good base with working class voters. It's, we'll see if he can hold on to that base, but I would say right now he pretty clearly is an underdog to Joe Biden. Now, I am on the train that it's too far out to declare, Biden the clear favorite for 2024, but I think if you held an election right now, Biden would win. Joe Biden broadly is more well-liked than Trump, and they're both unpopular. I obviously understand that, but when you look at how voters perceive them, they don't like Joe Biden, but they hate Trump way more. And this is even evident when you look at just psychologically. I don't know who did the poll, but there was a poll done a couple days ago. It asked voters, what's the first word that comes to mind when you think of Trump and Biden? And for Trump, they said corrupt, criminal, liar, right? Those are very bad things. For Biden, they said old and confused, which again, you don't want to be old and confused as president, but I think they're a bit weaker of bad adjectives than corrupt and criminal for Trump. So I'm going to say Donald Trump, as of right now, I think he'd be favored to lose to Joe Biden. Now, it's obviously early. Donald Trump has his upsides. He's proven people wrong before, so don't count him out. But right now, I think he would lose, and he lost in 2020. I think he loses pretty similar amount. Maybe he wins a state or two more, but maybe he also loses North Carolina. So who knows? Either way, I think he'd be favored to lose the Electoral College. So those are my rankings of candidates. If you were counting, I believe I gave 3 Republicans the check mark. That's Doug Burgum, Tim Scott, and Nikki Haley. And I gave the other 5 the X. Again, it's hard to beat an incumbent president. Joe Biden has his strengths. He also has his weaknesses, but we'll see. So thanks for tuning in, and I will see you all in the next video.